All right, we're just going to go ahead and get started. Again, I want to thank Councilor Govan for being on the call. She's part of this committee. To all the city employees, Lindsay, BJ, Chris, Sierra, and Focus Springfield, thank you for all that you do. Also to Darcy, thank you for being on the call. So call this meeting to order. It's on Wednesday, 1:05 p.m. on 4/5/2023. And Lindsay reached out to myself and Council President Lederman regarding update on the hazard mitigation plan. And again, she mentioned that it passed on, there's actually a deadline to adopt by April 18th, but she wants to kind of get in front of it before she went in front of the city council. So again, Lindsay, thank you for doing your due diligence and making sure we are informed before it actually gets to the floor. So at this time, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Councilor. And thank you everybody for joining us today. So the city's hazard mitigation plan, this is not the first time a hazard mitigation plan has come before the city council. This is actually the second time, and it actually needs to be reapproved and readopted every 5 years. So it gets approved by FEMA and then it has to be adopted by city council. And the reason that we're running into this deadline, it actually wasn't planned this way. It actually kind of worked out well this way in that we were already renewing our hazard mitigation plan. It's taken us a couple of years to do that. And FEMA has actually released a new enhanced set of guidelines which go into effect on April 19th. And that is an entirely pretty much new plan. So our counterparts over at MEMA have said, listen, this is perfect. FEMA just approved your plan, bring it to city council, get it approved before that the changes happen, and you'll be good for another 5 years. So that's our hope. So that's why I wanted to kind of see if we should and could have a subcommittee meeting first, because I don't want to make it seem like we're forcing a vote under a deadline. It just so happened to work out this way. So that's why I wanted to have a subcommittee meeting to potentially address any questions or issues ahead of time so we can get a vote on Monday. So that's why I'm here. And for anyone not familiar with what the city's hazard mitigation plan is, like I said, it is put out, its requirements are put out by FEMA, and they are also reviewed by MEMA, which is the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, the state agency, and FEMA is obviously the federal agency. The state has its own mitigation plan, and then every local government also has their own. And what the mitigation plan does is it identifies, categorizes, analyzes hazards to the city, specifically within the city limits. And those are natural disasters. And it talks about all the natural disasters that could affect our city, what the chances of those are happening, what that could mean quantitatively for the city, depending on the scope of those disasters, and then steps that the city needs to take to mitigate against negative things happening due to those disasters. And the reason why it's important to have this plan adopted and approved is because it makes us eligible for grant funding to mitigate these disasters. Without an approved hazard mitigation plan, we can't get what's called BRIC funding through FEMA. We've gotten 2 grants in the past, both through DPW, and Chris can talk a little bit about specifically what those grants are. You'll probably recognize what those projects were. So long story short, this is our plan. We would like it to be obviously adopted through city council to make us eligible for the next 5 years for this BRIC grant hazard mitigation funding when that becomes available. And I'll open it up to Commissioner Calvi or Chris in case they have anything to add to it. I'm a finance person. I don't live in this world, but I've driven the process the last few years. Our department has driven the process the last few years. to make sure that this plan is up and running and ready to go, so we're available to get the grant funding.
Before they go, I just want to recognize Councilor Whitfield as well on the call.
Thank you.
Well,
Chris, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. We've received grants for 2 projects. Number one was South Branch Parkway last summer for people who were driving there in the area of Sullivan Park. We had to do a major pipeline and culvert replacement of about $800,000. And this summer, we're going to be doing major work on Tiffany Street on a culvert there. And these are the type of programs that are funded through the state's hazard mitigation plan, BRIC program, and through MEMA and FEMA. And as Lindsay said, making sure that, number one, these locations are in the plan to talk about that. They're part of a protection plan for the city. And then number two, when we do make the applications, making sure that the process is in place and we have an approved plan. And as Lindsay mentioned, this detailed plan, it talks about dams, it talks about buildings, it talks about schools, hospitals, all sorts of support facilities throughout the city, police, fire, so that when anything does happen in the city, and we always laugh when we start talking about tornadoes and things like that. It's like, how does the city respond to those things? What is our plan? So those things are really in place at this point. And for good or bad, because we had a number of these major disasters, we kind of had processes really in place anyway. So the renewal that we've been working on with MEMA and FEMA at this point really will allow us to take the next step forward, especially with certain funding, because aside from MEMA, it is also the FEMA side as well that puts these grant applications out.
okay, thank you. Anything else, Commissioner Calvi?
Sure. When we went through this plan from 10 years ago or 5 years ago for the update, we looked at all the target hazards in the community and what our vulnerabilities were on those issues. We looked at things like fires in the urban interface, tornadoes, earthquakes, dam levee and levee breaches like they had in Louisiana. And we rated all those on a scale as to what we thought their relative impact would be on the community and what the mitigation costs would be of each one of those. And then the plan was written out as to if we had to mitigate one of those problems, what would be the relative expense and influx of capital that would be needed to fix all of these problems. We also looked at historical data from incidents we've had in the past and did projections going forward as to what we thought the vulnerabilities would be. So this is a sound plan. Lindsay and team and everybody put in a lot of work on it, doing all the evaluations. So I think it's a good plan for the city moving forward.
All right, thank you. I just have one quick question. Are there any major changes we should be made aware of to this plan that you guys are putting in place for us to look to approve, I should say?
That's a great question. And sorry, Commissioner, did you want to respond to that?
One of the main things that we upgraded was the fire in the urban interface area compared to the last plan. A lot of that was due to the tornado and the October storm and the microburst we had several years ago. There's a lot of deadfall in the undeveloped areas and parklands that we're going to start to be looking at addressing. Pat Sullivan and I have been in contact with Councilor Neal or Congressman Neal and with the Forest Service to look at perhaps doing some controlled burns in these areas to burn off some of the undergrowth and deadfall.
All right, thank you. And excuse my ignorance to it a little bit. Does this fall under, like, say we had a natural disaster? Now, does this fall under like evacuation plans for the city? We will go to like Mass Mutual Center, for instance. Is this kind of the same thing as the mitigation plan that we're talking about, or is it something totally different?
It doesn't really deal with that. It deals with the likelihood of events. Yep. And how to get funding to help mitigate these events.
Got you. Understood.
But
All right,
correct me if I'm wrong, Lindsay, there is stuff in there that talks about, we talk about shelter locations. If we're, just to expand on what Commissioner Calvi was saying, shelter locations throughout the city, and the idea is that not just say, hey, we got Central High School. It's when you bring 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people to Central High School, what else do you need?
right.
Food service, electricity, water, all those things. So a lot of those, you really start to drill down on what we need to do. And a number of the things that came out of the first study were actually, I'm going to say bigger stuff. For example, a lot of redundancy in our electrical systems in the city, which is a lot of what Eversource is doing. Redundancy in our fiber system, so that if there's a problem down and, we lose cell service, how can we do that? So we're doing a lot of those other upgrades as well, and making sure that those locations, if we're talking about shelters, do we have material, whether a lot of it's stored here at Tapley, or being able to get materials to a particular place within a particular time. And then get talking into, okay, what if it's half the city? How do you do it? What if it's, when we had the tornado, you couldn't go north-south. So how do you do that? How do you have services north? How do you have services south? So it does drill down a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, and one thing it does is it doesn't map out, but it does list the critical emergency, not services, but locations that either need to make sure they're less vulnerable to potential disaster, or they also list the places that we need to make sure that we are protecting if a disaster happens. So all of those locations, all the fire departments, all the police departments are listed there. The emergency communications is listed there. And then we also have all the senior centers, all the assisted living centers, all of those things are listed. So we know kind of, first of all, where to put our focus on protecting, and then if something does happen, where to shift our response. So
It's more of an infrastructure plan and as opposed to an evacuation plan.
Okay. Helpful information. All right, Councilor Whitfield, you have a question, so I'll give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't read this plan yet, but my question is it just for natural disasters? That's what the hazard mitigation plan really focuses on?
it is, yes. Actually, we were told that a pandemic is not considered.
Yeah, because that was gonna be my next question. Was a pandemic considered a natural disaster? And I know that Commissioner Calvi said one major change, Lindsay, but you were going to say something. Was it the same major change that he mentioned?
Yeah, it was going to be that. Obviously, we have a lot more of that data with Commissioner Calvi here. He was able to add a lot of that for us. And beyond that, there were no major material changes. It was just some updates.
Okay, and I know that these plans have to, I guess, have to be updated every 5 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this is the 5th year?
This is more like the 6.5 year, but it took us a little while to get it updated and a lot of back and forth with FEMA and MEMA. So here we are. I was thrilled when the approval came through from FEMA. We all were. So here we are.
So who worked on this mitigation plan? Other departments.
Yeah, so this was the folks you see here. It also included Pat Sullivan. And we also had some assistance from PVPA. PVPC, sorry. I always confuse it with PVTA. Yeah, PVPC.
Okay. All right. And when we went through this mitigation plan, did we look at like the structures of buildings with like Pat and DPW, like the road infrastructures and things like that?
Yes, that's included in here as well, and the earthquake factors and things like that.
Okay, I mean, that's just the extent of my knowledge of the hazard mitigation plan. So I'm just asking questions based on what I know. I'm glad that it got approved by FEMA. I think it's definitely something that we need to get funding in the future. And I know that I was coming in on the tail end of the funding that we got before, because we had a hazard mitigation plan in place. Can you just repeat what those things were?
Sure. A couple of them, Counselor, were projects that we had work on South Branch Parkway, where we had to do a major drainage rehabilitation for about $800,000. And this summer, we're going to be doing a rehabilitation culvert downstream rehabilitation on Tiffany Street. And those were both grants that we received through the hazard mitigation program by having an approved plan. We usually try to make an application every year. I know Pat makes more. And I believe, Lindsay, he did Lower Van Horn Dam.
Yes.
And I can't remember the other one, of the Forest Park roadway work.
Yep. Yeah,
That
we
was
submit,
another one.
I would say between 2 and 4 applications a year when we've been eligible. So we look forward to being able to resubmit
Right.
those things.
And one of the major things that we also did with this update was list all the projects we've done since the last one as well. So they one of the things they want to see, it's not a stagnant plan, that we are actually doing things, whether it's our own money or grant money.
I believe there was also money that we got for the dam up by Eastman that was mitigated several years ago.
And do we usually have to put in a match for those grants or no?
Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
like most FEMA funding, it's usually about a 25% match that we need to.
25. Okay, that's good to know that we're getting some funds for our infrastructure, because we're not getting a lot of money from the state or increases from the state on
Tell me about it.
I know. Oh, I sent you an email about some money we can go for possibly, but I'm pretty sure you already know about it. But hopefully we could try to increase that and lobby to our state legislation on some of the, we had no idea that that some of the things that we found out in our last meeting, Chris, so keeping us updated. And thanks for having this meeting, because I don't know, I've been sick, so I seen it in my email, jumped on, and I'm just glad to know that this plan is happening, and I'm going to support it, and I hope all other counselors will as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely will be supporting it, and I'll make some phone calls as well to see if we get some support prior to our meeting. But Counselor Govan, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions. I perused the report, not in depth, but I think I like what I read, what the parts of it that I did read, and I'm just glad that we're on top of this, and we're getting going forward with it. So thank you so much for doing the work on this, and I also look forward to supporting it at City Council.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Counselor Whitfield, for your comments and questions. Counselor Govan, thank you as well. I think, Lindsay, we're good unless you have anything else you want to add.
I don't.
Okay.
It's wonderful. Thanks for taking the time. And I hope we're able to answer, any questions you might have on Monday, and I hope we'll be good to go.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Bye.
everybody.
Have a good one.